everybody for being here today. Every Thursday we have somebody special to us to just have a conversation and hear about views and past experiences and future expectations, and then have an informal chat. Everybody can participate. So today for many of us is a very special day because we'll have Mark, which we know for so many years from Project Management Institute. We work very closely. So thank you, Mark. We've not seen you around for a while. So I think today hopefully is the beginning of a bit more regular conversations and seeing you more around these areas, sharing your views and expertise. So welcome, Mark. Thank you for being with us today.
Great to be with you.
So let me do like a bit the process. I'll have a couple of Q&A, and then we'll open up for questions from anybody. And so first of all, Mark, can you, for those who don't know you, I gave already a small bio.
Sure.
About you, Mark. Who's Mark Langley?
Sure. Well, I am, as you know, I'm the past president and CEO of PMI, but I'll go back before that. So I started my career at PwC, one of the intersections of Antonio's career and mine, although we never worked directly together. When I first met him, we had that in common, and it's not a surprise. I've known Antonio since early 2000s, although he came to the board later on, and we worked directly together, but we've known each other for a long time. I left public accounting. I was a CPA, moved into CFO roles, operations COO roles. And it's too long a story to describe, but I ended up finding PMI as a professional association. I had a single interview, fell in love with the idea of it, and I stayed there for 17 years, first as the chief operating officer, and secondly, and most recently as the chief executive officer. And as I tell everybody, I have spoken in smaller groups since leaving. I loved every minute of it. So any of you that are affiliated with will know that that I woke up every day excited to go to work because it was the greatest organization that I'd ever been associated with. And since then, I've been, kind of staying below the radar as much as I could. I think one of the hallmarks of a good leader, hopefully a great leader, is that, you kind of step out of the way when the leadership changes, there to support, but not too public and offering too public a point of view. And I've done that for the last year plus, and now slowly getting back into the public face. But it's been going really well, other than COVID-19, which we're all living through. Everything's been just fine. Family's healthy. I'm healthy. We're doing great.
And you just had a second granddaughter?
Grandson. I have two grandsons now. Yep. So it's fabulous. It's absolutely fabulous. And I know my wife is in the other room, so you guys know Jerry. So, and she would tell you if I didn't tell you, because I'm going to tell you, but the other one's newborn, so we don't know yet. But I am clearly the favorite of our first grandson. Just putting it out there. And she would confirm that if she were in the room today. So.
Sure. Mark, one question. When you were a teenager, what did you want to be? Did you want to be the CEO of PMI or what?
Exactly. It's exactly what I wanted to be. It came to me when I was in kindergarten. Yeah. And like anybody else, there's a lot of careers that you see as a young person, young man. So if I could have had my druthers, I would have been a professional basketball player. But since I only grew to 6 feet 2 inches tall and could only jump about a foot off the ground, my career ended by the time I got out of secondary school. So, but I've always had an interest in business and finance and operations. You may not know about me personally, but I'm a very handy person, so I can fix things, I can build things. So innately for me, it's always about building something. And so I really gravitated towards the roles where I thought I was building something and adding value. And I never really focused on the title as much as what will I be doing and will I be able to create value for that organization. And I've been really lucky because in every organization that I've worked, I really felt like I was able to make that kind of contribution, create value, help the organization grow. and then move on to the next opportunity. So never had a clear idea of a specific role. And I think it's in many ways too limiting an approach. I mean, it's natural when you're in school, and maybe we'll get to talk a little bit about this as we talk about the project economy. But I think it's, you know, one of the challenges of the education system is you're kind of funneled into a functional perspective, depending on the degree you pursue. And when you come out, you look for that functional opportunity. And so early on, you kind of struggle with, you know, if I'm going to be this person, I'll go in as an entry level, I'll become a medium person, I'll become a senior person, then I'm a director, a VP, of whatever. And I think that's important, but I think among other things, that's the one thing I think is going to have to change dramatically, even before COVID-19, but certainly now with this disruption that organizations are going through.
And Mark, there is somebody very special as well from our history who wanted to be on the call and who has very high appreciation of you, which is Greg Ballesteros.
I can see him right there.
You can see, he said, I want to be there.
I warned him that I would be coming on. I'm a real fan of Mark's, and it's always good to hear his voice and to connect up with him. So
I'm glad we got together in Florida at the end of last year before all this virus hit. So
yeah, it's great. And then again in Philadelphia.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, that was great.
October.
Hi,
So
Greg.
I just want to say one thing, since Greg is on the call and I see his picture now. But so I mentioned, you know, I stepped away for a year, and I think he's a shining example of having done the same thing. You know, 8 years as the CEO of PMI, and he stepped out of the limelight for about a year, and allowed me to take over and establish my own, you know, kind of vision and direction for the organization. And I've been fortunate. People like Greg have been great, you know, kind of mentors and examples for my career, and I've had that all throughout. So I think Greg deserved a lot of credit for stepping away, because I knew he loved PMI every bit as much as I did. So it's not an easy task, but he did it, and I found it, using his example and others in my career, it was the right thing to do.
Thank you, Greg. I'll give you a bit of time later maybe to speak, and maybe we can organize another call with you two to talking and sharing a bit about the evolution of PMI. But I'm really glad that we get you both together with people that, well, we all love that. For people that don't know, there's might be a few of you. Greg was the CEO previous to Mark. So many of us saw Greg the evolving PMI, then Mark taking it over, and then making it the way we see it. So thank you, Greg, for being here, and we'll get back to you in a few minutes, but thank you so much for being there.
Thanks.
It means a lot. Mark, when you started in PMI 2001 or 2? And
January of 2002, yep.
And how was the Project Management Institute at that time, and how did it evolve from the work from Greg and then your work to reach how many millions of people right now? Just briefly, the key things that you saw.
Yeah, well, so I think it's always a lot easier to talk about tangible metrics and things like that, and PMI surely has you know, plenty of those that they can be proud of. You know, I know during Greg's time, we tripled membership, and we continued that. We continued to drive the certification program when I took over, and I think when I left, there was nearly 1.5 million people certified ever by PMI, and you know, about 2/3 of those happened in my time as CEO. So there's a lot of metrics like that you know, Greg and I could easily, you know, shoot out that any organization would love to have. I left, and Greg contributed along the way to about $500 million in financial reserves for the organization. By the way, if we get to talk about COVID, this was exactly the type, although this is much more severe of an event than I think any of us had envisioned, but it's why we have or had those financial reserves. I hope PMI still has some of them left somewhere in the corners in the bank.
Yeah.
But to the I think the other metrics that are softer are more important, really. So when we came into the organization, the board built its first strategic plan, and those of you, and I can see you're all from all over the world, will remember that there was a time where PMI was just one of many project management associations around the world. I mean, every country had their own national association. PMI always had a vision to be a global association with global standards and global credentials. And we were on our way, but we certainly weren't without competitors and challengers to that. And so I think one of the metrics that that we're most proud of is that by the time we left, both Greg and I, and most recently I left at the end of 2018, PMI was very clearly the leading project management association in the world. And the strategic plan that we built together was really focused on the influence of PMI and the profession. So not only was PMI, of course, founded in North America and well known and respected in North America, but by the time I exited the organization, it was well known in the EU, in the UK. I was testifying in Australia at a Senate committee hearing. President Obama passed a law on program management in December of 2016. And there's so many examples like that. So yes, we had great growth. We had great financial results. We represented nearly 3 million people in our databases. But I think the influence and the respect and reputation that PMI had in the profession, in governments, and in organizations is likely, I think for me, one of the things I'm most proud of having been able to contribute to. And that's how I equate, when I think about what value did I contribute to the organization, what was I able to help create with all the teams and volunteers that we worked with around the world. And I think that's something that will stand up for a long time.
And how do you achieve that? Can you give us 1 or 2, 3 big lessons that you can scale up a business? Well, not a business, it's an organization, but from those numbers to millions, what would be the 2, 3 things that we would take into account?
Yeah, well, I mean, clearly there are business attributes, which is one of the things I loved about PMI. So I spent my first half of my career in the private sector. I was officer of publicly traded companies, publicly listed companies, and then I went to PMI, and it's a not-for-profit professional membership association. And the best part about PMI was all the business attributes that you had in the private sector, PMI had. But the thing it had that the private sector didn't have, and there's nothing wrong with for-profit organizations, they're supposed to make money, and that's their goal. But PMI had a different goal. It was really mission driven. I saw earlier Tom Laughlin, a good friend of both Greg and ours. He was the former president and CEO of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. He and I used to talk about mission driven but market focused. So while you had all the business attributes of any other organization in the private sector, you had this sense of mission and a greater purpose than you ever would have found in the private sector. And using that, the power of that, you're able to bring people together in a way. And PMI and probably most professional membership associations, if they're not, they should be, really focused more on relationships. And you build those relationships. So I'm not fond of the term ecosystem, but sometimes it's appropriate. And PMI's ecosystem included academics, registered education providers. Internally, PMI's chapters, we recognized early on that chapters were the single greatest intangible asset that PMI had. You won't find them listed on the balance sheet, right? So from a pure financial perspective, it's not there. But it was and is the single greatest intangible asset. By the time I left, we were well over 300 chapters in virtually every part of the world. And a key part of kind of growing from a grassroots level, matching that with the advocacy at the top level with governments and for-profit companies. At the handoff between Greg and I, we created the Corporate Executive Council of the Institute. It was in the month that I was actually announced to be the CEO. We started the new model. He handed it off to me, and we took it running. There's some people on this call that have been members of it in the past. So you build this, kind of network of relationships, and that gives you leverage and it gives you scale, unlike that which you would have to build in the private sector. You would need a direct sales force in a private sector to drive and build an organization the size of PMI, and we had the best of both worlds: a mission and a purpose that had people wanting to contribute and advance the profession.
Thank you, Mark. Let's move on now to the project economy. This was something that was launched also towards the end of your mandate. What is for you the project economy? Can you explain that briefly?
Sure. Actually, it was. I'm pleased that it stayed in almost in its entirety when it was launched in October with the new brand. But the work on the project economy actually had done while I was still there. What hadn't been done is that kind of graphical brand refresh, which everyone's now hopefully accustomed to. And I've heard from a few, you're not quite certain about it yet, but it'll warm up to it. It'll work in the future. But the project economy, really the concept came from the reality that as I looked at my own private sector experience and talking to executives and leaders of project management organizations, and I'll give you an example. I've been to so many places with so many PMI professionals, but I was in AstraZeneca in Sweden, and they largely would consider themselves, part of, the pharmaceutical sector or pharmaceutical industry. But they, like many other organizations that are leading, recognize they're not only in the pharmaceutical business, they're also in the project business. And if you start to extend that to every type of organization, some it's more clear, engineering, procurement, construction. They have parallel paths on careers between engineering, but also program and project management. Every organization is also in the project business. And when you look at the economy, which is where the connection came, it's probably 18 trillion of fixed capital investment worldwide. $18 trillion is being delivered in projects and programs. And when you see that, the effort was, we need to get everyone to consider that their business isn't 90 to 95% business as usual, running the business, manufacturing, service delivery, whatever it is. It's really an economy that's going to be increasingly, and that's the important part, increasingly driven by project management and projects. And that's the connection that we made. And you see that playing out now in organizations dealing with the coronavirus pandemic as an example. Think of all the projects that have been initiated to deal with this, both from vaccines, but also getting temporary hospitals in place, personal protective equipment supplied and delivered to places all over the world. I mean, this is taking place both before, but certainly even after the pandemic is at least clear enough for many to get back to work.
And it's likely to accelerate, I guess, with the reconstruction of economies and businesses. So more projects.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned earlier from my functional, kind of when you go through education, you're kind of geared or pointed towards, especially when I went to university, it's a little bit different now. I've 4 children and their careers can take a little bit different. But when I was in university, you were almost required to decide what you wanted to do for the rest of your life, right? I'm going to go become this major. I'm going to get this degree. I'm going to come out. I'm going to be an electrical engineer. I'm going to be a programmer back then, a coder and a developer now, whatever it is. But it's a little bit different now for this generation. But there's a break that's necessary from that kind of functional perspective. And we have a mutual acquaintance, Roger Martin. PMI has had him speak at many of our events. He and I have spoken, and at one of them, he talked about a shift to the organizing principle, and the organizing principle should become projects, not some other organizing principle, which in my experience is more functional. So you think about that massive org chart that we all see, and it's very functional and hierarchical. There's boxes across the top, there's more boxes going down, and largely it's organized functionally. And as I was working with the PMI board and towards this project economy, for me, I feel it's necessary in a perfect world to flip it so that the organizing principle is more the project and the value that the organization delivers. But knowing that that's probably never going to fully happen, then there has to be some approach where there's at least the two of them coexisting in a way that's appropriate for the organization, that represents the nature of its business and the balance of the business, but there's at least an equal strategic emphasis on the organizing principle being projects.
To the point, I've heard that some companies are canceling job descriptions. No more job descriptions, we will just have project roles. So yes, I think what you say makes a lot of sense, and it might be radical for many.
Yeah, and I think it's been spoken of many times. I mean, if you go just in a technology space with Gartner, they've talked about the ambidextrous IT organization. So one that's basically running the business, and the other half that's changing and introducing new, capabilities, functions, applications, and so on. But that's located just in one part of the organization, and this is really an enterprise issue. And I think that's one of the other challenges that I've seen when I was the CEO of PMI, which is the role of executive leadership, and in particular on a project, the role of the sponsor. But even beyond that, truly this most senior level of the organization has to see this as a mandate for success going forward. I'll give you a great example. I was speaking with at a conference, internal conference of a very large global engineering and product company, 400,000 employees worldwide. And the group that was ahead of project management internally pulled me aside and said that the consultants, they were going through a transformation, trying to become more agile. And the consultants that they had hired came and confided to the leaders of the project management profession in that organization that they felt they were going to be consulting in that organization for a very long time, which is quite a statement when you think about it. So they said, well, why do you say that? Why do you think you'll be here? And they said, well, because the executive team just said, this whole organization agility thing has nothing to do with us. We just want you to go make them more agile. We want the organization to be agile. Leave us out of it. We're fine. And I think that's the issue in organizations, which is why PMI studied in 2012. We launched our first organization, Agility. We renewed it in 15 and 17. But at the heart of that, and in organizations that are more agile than others, is a role for executives, and including the highest level executives in the organization, not just sponsors, certainly sponsors, but also call it the C-suite for lack of a better term. But anybody that's really deciding on the top level portfolio decisions, if you don't have faster review and decision-making cycles, the organization itself, from top to bottom, will never be as agile as you want. Interestingly, agile methodologies out of the top 10 practices were in the bottom 5. So one year it was 8th, and the other year I think it was 6th. But there's so many more things that were required or made organizations with high agility leaders.
Thank you, Mark. I want to open up now. I have a few other questions, but let me open up. I think everybody has a question. I just want to tell participants that maybe some of our participants today, they don't know too much about PMI, PMP. So let's try to frame the questions around project management, the profession, and we will organize something maybe more specific to PMI and PMP with Greg, with Mark, and some others. But today it's a bit more generic. Let me move first to Greg. Greg, you want to comment anything that Mark said, or from your perspective, just before the times of Mark, just share a bit your views. It would make a great connection. Please, Greg.
Yeah, first of all, Mark is really articulate in presenting the role of the project, what the project economy means to the profession. And I'm glad he didn't say that when I was in college, he was in elementary school, which was really nice of him not to say. But, I think at least going back to the late 1990s and then early 2000s, there was a significant press for, I wouldn't say for organizing the profession so much as creating the profession. The profession, the actual start of the PMP was in the late 1980s. The documentation and standards for it from PMI's point of view came out in that late 1980s time frame. And we were beginning to see a profession evolve, certainly in the United States and then globally. And when I came on board in 2002, there was very little global interface with service other than the chapters. And the chapters continued all the way through my time, and certainly through Mark's, to be one of the primary delivery systems of service in the profession. And it was incumbent upon us to review it. And Mark and I had a discussion very early on how this whole idea of a relationship with individuals in the profession. And we decided that what we had to concentrate on together was relationships, not just members, that there was relationships in those who were non-members, relationships with those that were seeking information about the profession. So when we thought, even tactically, what kind of information system we needed, we decided in 2002 that we needed an information system that could handle somewhere around 1.5 million people, 2 million people, so that we could really begin to nurture the relationships. And a lot of the operational decisions were made with the belief that we had an obligation globally to create relationships in all aspects of the profession. I think two of the things that came to mind, one was ethics. And I think the issue of ethics, it doesn't alter, it expands the sense of the actual project itself, because it's not just the how, it's the why. And when Mark talked about value, it's the value to not only the customer, but the relationships they're building with the community, society, the planet, whatever that might be. But it was a critical issue to address during the time I was there, and still continues to be important when we look at what happened to Boeing and the 737 MAX or Volkswagen. Those are issues that affect the very highest people, like Mark said, the very highest people in the organization. They have to be accountable and stand tall. And so the decisions of what they're going to do, what impact it's going to have in the world, what impact is it going to have on society, those are decisions that have to be made when the projects themselves are decided. And as Mark said, they should be integral with decision-making in the project. They should have that understanding from the get-go. What value are we providing? So there were, the way I look at it, it was continuity. I was a fan of Mark's ever since I met him. And I was a champion for him to become chief executive when I retired. And I think we were blessed. That's my dog agreeing with me.
The dogs like me too.
Yeah, they do. He's the favorite. I admit. His grandchild, the dogs, the whole thing. But I really believe it. My passion since 2000, well, prior to coming on to PMI and then afterwards, I became increasingly focused on what I would call sustainability. It's a lucid term, and the role that project management could have on it. The issue of the haves and the have-nots when I came back from traveling around the globe, because we were trying to become a global organization, seeing so much disparity in quality of living. And on top of that was the variability in the environment, the variability in other aspects that I apologize for. It set for me off on a tangent. I apologize.
It's okay.
I can't stop them now. But I think what I'll do is turn off here and let you guys continue on.
Thank you, Greg. And like I said, I would like to have a more in-depth session with you, Mark. And today is more or less just bringing you back on stage. Before we go to the question, I want to ask Richard Straubs. My quest over 20 years has been finding business leaders who understands the value of projects. And Richard is one of these persons. He worked for IBM many years. He's probably one of the best connected person in the management, thinking, leadership world. He gets the best speakers every year to Vienna. And with him, I connected straight away. So Richard, do you mind just telling us your views around projects and how do you see that evolving? Because I appreciate your views as a not PMI person, but really understanding as an executive the value of projects. Richard, you mind just quickly telling us your views? And I'd like to have you as well in one of our next shows. Unmute? Sorry, I need to unmute you.
Yes.
Now.
Sorry. Yeah, it's a bit spontaneous. But
Yes.
How should I say? In IBM, I was 32 years with IBM, and I was not directly involved in the project management initiatives in IBM, but it was happening in areas where I was very close to. So I think I learned in IBM, in the changes we went through in the 90s and in the early 2000s, how important this subject became and how the company changed its view on how it should be run. So I think that was an experience that I made. I must say, at the time, when in the earlier stage, when I went personally through some project management education, basic education, I would say, I also experienced that there was a lot of structure and formal environment in some way, and formal planning. And as you know, as we moved into the 90s and 2000s, I felt more and more this may also be difficult if it's taken too far. How far can you formalize things and really capture all the steps you want to take and you have to take and keep it under control? And then I was confronted increasingly with the agile movement, and it came up. Mark mentioned it, the questions of agility. And so I think after my IBM time, when I started the Drucker Forum, what we tried to do is to bring the different currents together. We don't have something to sell, or we don't have a single philosophy other than the fundamental ideas of Peter Drucker. That's our philosophy, but we don't have specific methods, concepts, etc. We always look, how does this fit into Peter Drucker's fundamental philosophy? And so it was very interesting for me to see then how the project management philosophy has evolved on the one hand, and how agile was being integrated in this formally rather, I would say, rather very structured approaches. And that's still something of great interest to me. How do you combine the two? How do you manage continuity and change? Continuity of this more formal approaches to something which is much more, which has more informal and fast-changing components. So in this sense, I felt these various currents are still in evolution. And my reason to join today is just to get an update from the most competent representatives. Where do we really stand in this? Yeah, how much agility is in project management today, and how does it play out, and where do you see it moving?
Antonio, if I could just add, since we're talking about Peter Drucker, it's interesting. I do know the Drucker Forum, and we've actually never met, but actually in 1971, years ago, I did some research and reading into kind of the history of project management. Peter Drucker actually talked or spoke about project management but he didn't use the word project. He talked about teams, usually a fairly small number with different skills and backgrounds, kind of coming together and being brought out of what he called the organization or their home, which what I said earlier is the functional boxes that they operated in. And he talked about leadership at any one time places itself in according to the logic of the work. So back more towards the organizing principle as projects. So I think there's a lot of opportunity still there, because when I used to do so many presentations a year, I used to put up that massive word chart example that you're familiar with, Antonio, with right after the quotes from Drucker about teams, and Bennis actually has similar ones. And I think about it, 1971, 40 years later, and if you look at the org charts today, they look exactly like the ones in 1971, and we've made zero progress on that, which I think itself means that organizations, if they want to transform and if they want to disrupt, they're going to have to really disrupt some of the fundamental underpinnings of management in their organization. And I would say it starts with the human resources groups in those organizations. You mentioned, kind of throwing out position descriptions. There's certainly organizations that are doing that. Others are advocating for blowing up HR teams. I mean, HBR has published multiple articles on what to do with HR. And it's not that HR is the problem, but it's that the alignment that comes out of decades of management under a certain approach is impossible unless you actually disrupt that. I proposed on the way out, I don't think it's maybe something we could take up in the Strategy Implementation Institute, the concept of the Office of Strategy Delivery. So different than the PMO, bringing forward all the things that we think really work well out of the PMO, but really bringing into this group more capabilities and authority and connection to strategy and connection to decision making that ever existed in even an enterprise PMO. And I think that that's something that, as a stepping stone towards maybe that future state, something like the Office of Strategy Delivery, I think is a really viable concept still.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Richard. We had the pleasure to listen to Rita McGrath, and I think she's one of these few thought leaders which understands that everything around us changes projects and is constant, but you have different ways to address it. Some of them is agility methods, some of them is more formal methods, more discipline, but she's very good at defining the type of approaches that you need. And the more variance, the more unknowns, the less structure and discipline you can put on it. So I think we are all kind of connecting around the thinking, and we need to define this better as we move forward.
Yeah, one thing and I saw that you had the session you had done a couple of weeks ago with her as well, and I think you missed the meeting, but she and I we were at a group lunch, about 8 to 10 people, and she said two things actually, and one of them is because I think there's another disconnect in organizations is really what is strategy versus what is the implementation of strategy. And too often, I mean, think about the organizations that the participants today you work in. How many parts of the company have a strategy? There's a marketing strategy, there's an IT strategy, there's an HR strategy. Everybody has a strategy. And I think it really confuses the organization around what are the key strategic decisions, and then what are we doing to implement strategy successfully. And one of the things she said I thought was really important was strategy is not immediate. And I think that that's a concept that's lost, especially on executives who are under pressure because they want to see something happen so quickly or rapidly. They think we've decided the strategy, in 6 months, we're going to be successful and we'll have achieved it. But strategy is not immediate. It's very long-term. And I'm certainly not as long-term as it was 20 years ago, but it's not immediate. It's not something you're going to see in a quarter's time. And the other thing she said, and speaking back to the agility, is that one of the fundamental necessities of agility in organizations is trust. And we know from every report that we've read in the last 5 years, trust is something that's waning in organizations. The Edelman Trust Barometer is out there every year, and it shifts who people actually trust and rely on for information. But trust is not at a peak right now in organizations. And I think that's a challenge for leaders. And I think they need to take ownership and accountability over that. And that's one of the things that when we I created Brightline. The Brightline principles themselves speak, Antonio, about executives owning the strategy they developed. And I mean, they own the delivery of it. They don't just own the development of it. And I think it's really important that organizations and leaders start to think like that and behave like that.
Let me move now to other people question. Shrikant, can you just share your question briefly? Let's try to get as many questions as possible, and I'll ask Mark to be short as well. Shrikant, can you
hi.
show us where are you? Can you
Hi.
tell us where you are quickly?
Hi, Antonio. Hi, Mark, and very happy and glad to be part of this.
Where are you calling from?
I'm from India. I'm working for an US big telecom company. And apart from that, I am a PMP certified. I'm working as a volunteer for PMI. We have a program called Champions, where a lot of other project management people from professionals from different organizations part of it and doing our advocacy to project management. So only question is like in the changing worlds, things not relevant anymore when it comes to when we go to the people and say like about PMP and all this is like they feel it is not relevant anymore as they have seen Agile now again is safe. All the things are coming into the picture. So just wanted to know from you like what are the new strategies, all that. Yeah.
So,
Mark.
So I go ahead. All right. So I think the one thing I found, I'll try and be as brief as possible, is that organizations are forever looking for the silver bullet, and they get enamored with whatever the latest thing is. And not to say that agile methods don't add value in organizations, but there's already decade of results that show that agile isn't the solution to project success or delivering value in every organization in every case. So from my point of view, I still believe that, and by the way, I don't think agile is even project management. I think it's really more about life cycle management. And even that was contemplated by the original founders in something called short interval scheduling, right? But it has a whole different approach than today than it was conceived then. But I do think that PMP, what it represents, assuming it continues to evolve and lead the way, is relevant. And in a simple analogy that was given to me once years ago is agile certificates and other things like even Prince 2 certification is against a single methodology. So I know how to do this one thing that I'm certified in. But PMP by design is more the difference between a chef and a cook. So if you give a chef a table of ingredients, they can create something. They'll use all of them. If you give a cook a recipe, they'll do it exactly that way every time. And that's the difference to me. And it may be a little bit too extreme in terms of the hyperbole, but that's what PMP represents to the profession. This is a professional project manager that, given the circumstance, the context, will use whatever methods are available to them to deliver successfully on behalf of the organization and the customer.
Thank you, Mark. There's another question from Amir Ali. It's a bit the same lines. There's several questions in the same line. So just Amir, if you can just quickly tell us where you're from and the question.
Hi, Antonio. I'm from Pakistan and I'm project management consultant. I'm providing companies the services of PMP and RMP. Okay, my question has been answered by Mark a little bit, but now I would like to ask, since PMP is changing on 2nd of January, this means we are moving more towards agile sector as compared to construction sector. So in future, how do the construction sector would look towards that? Because PMP is considered as a gold standard when you are hiring the people. And if the people are more familiar with the agile sector, they are not relevant in the construction sector anymore.
And I think that's the tension of when you talk about project management. There's a natural tension that projects are unique, and therefore they can be very unique by sector. I'm not familiar with the changes that will be rolled out. I assume it's done as a result of a role delineation study, which has a different name. So I can't really speak to what it's going to look like in January. I've not been involved in that, having left over a year ago. but I am familiar with the tension between, say, the EPC, engineering, procurement, construction, and say IT. And there's a lot of talk about Agile and IT for good reason. And the engineering space is finding a way to use Agile where they can. So if I'm building a major plant, there's obviously a lot of technologies and controls. We can use Agile methods within that. But if I'm pouring concrete and foundations and buildings, we're not, one leader on our global executive council said, Mark, when I pour concrete, I don't expect it to move. So I think that's, there's the tension there, but you can use Agile to the extent, and that's my point around, the role, what a PMP should perform as is knowing when to use the right method. Where can we use Agile to accelerate a piece of it, if not the entire project? And I think that's the difference, and why I saw project managers' role change from managing basically project artifacts, schedule, budget, to leading people, recognizing that you're really not managing a project, you're leading people. And that happened throughout my time there. And more towards the end, what organizations are looking for are what I would call project executives, to have a greater connection to decision-making and strategy in organizations, to really understand the business that your project is being developed and delivered in at a level that requires you to be much more than just a good project manager.
Thank you for the question. Ibrahim Shira, where are you calling from and what's your question? I like it. It's a bit different. Ibrahim.
Hey, yes, how you doing? I'm calling you from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, from Riyadh. I'm specialized in PPP, public-private partnerships. My question is related to the emerging technology and how they're going to take over some of the value chain activities of the project management. For instance, when we talk about AI or IoT on project sites, or when you talk about some certain activities within the project management lifecycle and product development lifecycle. I see a lot of movement in this area from different sides, from the private sector and from the public sector. I work for the public sector, and I worked before on the private sector. Thank you so much.
I think there's no doubt technology is disrupting every organization, every business, and that's only going to accelerate as well, because it'll become increasingly faster, new tools, new applications. So when I created the talent triangle, I would have considered technology skills under technical skills. So if you're familiar, for those of you not familiar with it, it should be still on PMI's website. If not, it's been published in the past. But the three main areas of skills, competencies, and behavior that I believe good project leaders need are technical, so risk, schedule management, earned value, those type of things. Strategy and business management. So I mentioned just a question ago, understanding the organization's strategy, its go-to-market, customer relationship model. If you don't understand those, you'll probably be less successful in delivering some part of the organization strategy. And then the third is leadership. And that's really around things that were typically called soft skills: communication, conflict resolution, negotiation, organization change management. But because of the role of technology, what it was clear to me is technology just didn't fit any longer. So we created a digital overlay to the talent triangle. I don't know if PMI still publishes it. I mean, I do read the reports still when they come out, but I would encourage you to consider the role of technology in each of the three sides of that triangle. So technically, what role does technology play within the projects that you're leading? From a strategy and business standpoint, what role will technology have on your organization's strategy, its implementation, its success, your customers, and so on? And then from a leadership standpoint, are you able to use and leverage technologies? Are you current on technologies, things like IoT, and how it will impact not just your organization, but your customers' organizations? And so I consider it almost like it's a pervasive, and therefore we considered it a digital overlay to the talent triangle. And that's how I would encourage all of you to think about it, because it's only going to become more critical. And yes, positions and roles will be displaced, but I think in the end, it'll create more opportunity because there'll be more projects, not less projects.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for the question. There's comment from Maria, everything is a project. I like that. William Baxter, change the bank, run the bank. I think we know that when you're working banking, it's been implemented some years ago already. There is a question from Suzanne and from Christian. Let's go with Suzanne Davenport first, and then Christian. Suzanne, where are you calling from?
Hello, Antonio. I'm calling from Richmond, Virginia. This has been a great conversation, and I saw your comment about having another session devoted to this, and that feels like a good idea to me. I'm aware that we can manage things in many, many different ways. I often wonder if simplifying the definition of a project, I think Maria are you the one that said everything's a project? And I wonder if there are just some things that could be more easily managed if they were managed as a project, but without a deadline. We're seeing, I think, a growth in product development as a career. And I don't think the product development people need to be on a different page from the project management people. They're very similar, except that one has a deadline and one doesn't. Mark, I might be interested in knowing whether you see any value in changing the definition of what a project is. We could find a lot more agility if we change that definition, I think.
Yeah, well, you've added agility into the end of the question, so I might take it a different way. But I do think that the intersection of what was traditional project management and what's now agile methods is at the product level. And I think that the more the two can come of, I think agile created, obviously it started in technology. You remember the Agile Manifesto and talked about working code, and so it's a subset of what we might otherwise see in a project. But the intersection is at that product level that's delivered. And I think there's an opportunity for the mindsets to come back together. Actually, Greg and I attempted to do that in 2009 together. We went to one of the Agile gatherings, I think they're called Scrum gatherings. And because I think that movement was, we're different, we're different, so don't call us project managers. And project managers, like, you can't run a project without doing all these things. And I think we need to see them come together. And I think the intersection point should still be around the product. But I also think the difficulty is they've defined it in a way that actually, in my sense, product managers, if you look at the role, it actually looks like a lot of the functional role of somebody in a particular department. And what we're seeing is a bifurcation at best, but really a splintering of accountabilities. And I think it needs to come together. In terms of changing the definition of a project, I think that should be something that is considered, all the time in an organization. What do we consider a project? Because it might, there is an end to it. Even IT projects have an end. They just have release 2, release 3, release 4, release 5. If there's a maturity in leadership, you understand that this is just the first phase of what we've done. But we need to call it finished so that we can move on to the next phase. And so I think changing the definition, more importantly, I'll go back to the role of the sponsor and executives. Their lack of understanding or acceptance of whatever it means to your organization is going to be a challenge to you to be successful. Because if they don't understand the approach, they don't understand what's going to be delivered and why it's going to be delivered, then they'll forever be like, wait, that's not what I wanted. I wanted the whole thing, and you've given me some subset of it, and now I'm really upset. And therefore they say project management has no value. I blame them.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Mark. My view is that project management was ahead of the curve before the Agile. Agile took product management to a higher end, and now project management is coming on top of that, but we need to be smart and converge product and project into something that is about delivering value. Who cares what you call it? And I think Emma was pointing that. But Mark, are you okay to stay 5 more minutes? And I think we need another follow-up session. There's so many questions that we probably need to have a new one.
I'm having a lot of fun. I'll stay as long as you like me to.
No, I want to finish on time. I think we are all working like on the dot, but let's agree we'll continue the conversation. Let me just quick go to Christian, a good friend of many of us.
Yes, thank you so much, dear Antonio, and it's such a pleasure to see you guys again and the whole crew. I'm Christian Deloes in Stockholm. I'm a former chapter officer of the Sweden PMI chapter. I have many, many friends in the PMI world. So I would like to say, just quickly, in the COVID world we're living in, what has happened now within less than 2 months, that we actually, where we thought it would be in terms of digital transformation in 2023 or 2025, something like that, and that the need to be able to converge into business agility is not only essential for survival, but for the long-term view of all organizations and companies around the world. And to achieve that and to just try to put something around the discussion is actually the recipe for successful and agile transformation is to connect the strategy to the execution by what? By the people side of change. So if you imagine a glacier crevasse, you need to build a bridge, and this is the people. And as we know, Antonio and the likes, at the bottom, this is benefits realization, and at the high level, it's value management. Thomas as well, we discussed a lot recently, Thomas and I. So it is about to create this connection and bring out the full value of the project economy that is coming up very quickly, even more than before. So how to do this? It's to make sure that you connect the strategy with the strategic portfolio, with benefits realization, and then as maturity rises, with value management. And within the portfolio, you work in 3 month increments with 2 most important goals to actually accelerate the strategy, because you need to be able to balance running with changing the business. And within this time frame of 3 months increments, what you do actually is to work in these MIGs, like with the OKR, and it's the same methodology, but explained in mixed. That's objectives and key results. So in the projects, you're going to work under these 2 MIGs each 3 months. What you have actually is the delivery in terms of 2 weeks sprints. So Agile connects to projects, and the whole change program is what is being funded and authorized through the portfolio as well. And what you do, the last bit which is missing, the bridge, you make sure that in your benefits dependency map, which is the middle part, the bridge, that you connect this with increased change readiness, and the second and last part is increased success probability. By doing that, you can actually set the objective of culture transformation, which is needed. And by doing so and integrating ProScience ADKAR methodology, which is the most known and the one which actually works the best and the well known. So when you do this, you are able to actually shorten the transition time into business agility and bring the people with us and make the distinction between portfolio, program, and project management, and integrating both the traditional and agile methodologies. I have done this very successfully. It works brilliantly to accelerate measurable, sensible culture transformation.
Christian, that was not a question.
Yeah, but let me answer it anyway.
Yeah, the question is, sorry guys, I got carried away, you know me. So the question is now, and you can't answer it because we don't have the leadership. Maybe some of you are still active PMI people, I know. So my question to you is, when are we going to see the full integration of what I just said? Because this is the true value of project economy.
Yeah, so you're right. I don't know whether PMI even has, to what degree they have what you've just articulated on their radar. I know they have a full portfolio revamp that they're underway. But the one thing I want to focus on that you did say, Christian, and this is where I think that every organization fundamentally fails, is all the things you said are great, but all those should begin with people. You can't transform the organization until you begin to focus and transform your people. take that to an organization agility, but leave us alone. You know, it's everybody else's job. I interviewed a president of a North America business operation for another global organization. And he said, why are we talking about projects and project managers? That has nothing to do with me. That has nothing to do with what I focus on every day. So if you don't focus on your people, including the executives, it won't be successful. And there's so much written about you know, talent development and, you know, HR, and Antonio's mentioned the position description. The transformation should begin, and that's why I was really excited. I did found Brightline, but they've published a lot of things after I left, and one of them was the transformation compass, and they talked about transforming, starting with the people first, and that has to be the central theme and approach to whatever change you're trying to drive in your organization, whether it's around agility or just increasing competencies. And I'm reminded of an article that I read a few years ago, because there's such a misunderstanding. People will say, you know, we want all A team players in our organization. You know, we don't have the right people, and you hear people say, executives say, we don't have the right people, get different people. And they just acquiesce on their own accountability for having the right people in the right place in their organization. So this HBR article came out. It was a research study, might have been done by Bain, I'm not sure. I'd have to go back, and it's found that the leading organizations in their study had, on average, 16% of what we would call A players. So 16% of their workforce was A players. Those that were the others had 14%, and the study average miraculously was 15%. So think about it. There's very little difference between a leading organization and a whatever they call the others in that study, in terms of the percentage of A talent that they had in their organization. It's almost equal. So something else is different, and what is different is how they apply the talent in their organization and how they focus on having the talent. And it's an old narrative. You put your best people on the most important projects or your most important initiatives, but it goes beyond that. It's how quickly you can move them. Do you know where they are? Do you know who they are and where they are? And are their skills and what made them successful fungible? If you take them from this part of the organization, move them over here, will they be successful? How do you assess that? These are things that are really the accountability of the executives and organizations, and what I was trying to get to, really to get the attention of, by creating Brightline, this gap between strategy development and strategy implementation. And the strategy implementation institute is jumping right into that to pick it up. And I'm thrilled to be part of the advisory group with Antonio on that. But that's really the issue. And if you don't focus on the people, so when we wanted to transform PMI at some level, when I was there, we were trying to get to be even ourselves more agile. I began with myself and with my team. I sat down and said, where am I engaged with the organization? Literally, I had them, everybody build it out in a graphical form. Where am I engaged? Where am I potentially a roadblock to being more agile as an organization? And I changed 90% of my engagement with the organization. I don't mean I got disengaged. I just meant I changed how I engaged with the organization. And then I took the team, and then from there we went into the organization. And I think if you don't do that as a leader in an organization, you'll never be successful. It'll forever be somebody else's fault. We don't have the right people. They didn't do what I wanted them to do. We're not fast enough. The competition's better. They have a better product. It has to start, the accountability has to be with leader. And I would say leaders at all levels, including project managers. We can no longer point the finger at the sponsor. It's our role to get the sponsor to do what we need them to do. We can't point the finger at technology or marketing or whoever else. So I think accountability is a big issue. And I think the skill sets that we're looking at will change and are already changing. A highly underrated skill or behavior in individuals for me has always been curiosity. The most successful people that I've worked with are infinitely curious about what's going on around them and why things work the way they do and how they can make it work better. It's kind of like Thomas Edison, but on your team, 1,000 ways not to do it. That's how I think about it.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Christian. I want so many points that you can comment and add value on this, like the CEO, I don't remember which company, that fires himself to reinvent himself into the new business model. And And then I would add the comment of people and purpose. I think purpose is so important, even for projects. I think purpose is even more important than a business case, but we don't see that in our methodologies. The why of the project drives whatever you want to achieve if it's strong enough. So there's so much to talk about that I feel a bit sorry to cut us all, but we need to keep focused and we need good project management, finish on time. But thank you so much, Mark, for being here. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Greg, everybody. I think we need to have more conversation like that. Mark, I take your board. Maybe we'll have one day per week where we can zoom in into this issue of projects, the evolution.
Sure.
There's so many great points on the chat that I feel bad not taking them. So maybe we need to have a special day during the week that we get together to address this. The Thursdays are people like you, Mark. We'll have Kumar Bardoria, which Richard knows very well, an expert in neuroscience, next Thursday. On Sunday, I would like to invite you all, Sunday, 8 p.m. Europe, Mark Prinsky. He has a big challenging idea. He wants to reach 2 billion kids, educate them. How can we achieve that? So that's where we get as a brainstorming machine and try to help Mark to achieve that vision. So how can we reach 2 billion kids? Not their parents, the kids. And that's what we're going to be working on Sunday, 8 p.m. Thursday next week, we have Kumar, a great speaker, neuroscience. It's so brilliant to learn about that. I need to get back to Richard, and Mark will try to schedule more regular meetings like this because this has been incredible. I think we could go on for hours, but we need to stop here. So thank you very much for your time, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great
Bye.
to see everyone. Hope
Take
to
care.
see you again soon.
Thanks, Antonio. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.
Stay safe.